Want to know what I was doing?
Shut up.
Please don't tell me to shut up.
Jeremy Glick had the compound misfortune of losing his father at the World Trade Center, then accepting Bill O'Reilly's invitation to talk about it.
Because you have a warped view of this world and a warped view of this country.
Well, explain that. Let me give you an example.
No, I'm not going to debate this with you.
Well, let me give you an example.
He aggressively pursued me when he found out that I was a 9/11 family member who was against the war and signed and registered my dissent publicly.
I'm not going to
The
dress you.
ruling class, a small minority.
Cut his mic. I'm not going to dress you down anymore, out of respect for your father. We'll be back in a moment with more of the facts.
We're done?
We're done.
I told O'Reilly that it was cowardly for him to cut off my mic. I thought he wanted to debate me. He said, "Get out of my studio before I tear you to fucking pieces."
Point to his name, you liar!
But it wasn't just O'Reilly and Fox.
He didn't send enough soldiers to Iraq.
In the era of with us or with the terrorists, it seemed everything on the American airwaves was right versus left.
You're taking cheap, little, pathetic shots. I'm trying to tell you what the truth is.
And the right was winning.
They are lucky we allow them to exist on the same continent.
And if they can't do that, just shut up.
But according to media watchdog Charles Lewis, love it or hate it, the central issue ceased to be Fox and became pro-administration bias in the so-called mainstream media.
Most of the major American media have apologized for their coverage as being too deferential and not sufficiently critical leading up to the war. And in fact, it was just that. It encouraged the war drums. They banged the war drums as loudly as anyone.
What followed was the rush to war in Iraq. With U.S. troops on the Iraqi border, NBC News commissioned a consultant's report on its 24-hour cable channel, MSNBC.
America's news channel.
The report's prime target, MSNBC host and anti-war voice, Phil Donahue.
There's a fear, there's really a palpable fear among the executive decision-making levels of American broadcasting, especially when we were rolling into Iraq, of the anti-war voice. Fear.
And that consultant's report gave NBC executives reason to fear. It slammed Donahue as a left-wing liberal out of touch with the current marketplace and a difficult public face for NBC at a time of war. And it raised the possibility the Donahue show would become a home for the liberal anti-war agenda at the same time as its competitors were waving the flag. With the U.S. poised to invade, MSNBC canceled Donahue, blaming the ratings.
I truly do believe that if I had been as passionately for the war as I was against the war, I would still have a program on MSNBC.
And so it's gone for the past 4 years, the growing gap between what was said and done about Iraq and what was true.
The year 2005 will be recorded as a turning point in the history of Iraq, the history of the Middle East, and a history of freedom.
Journalist Seymour Hersh.
Do they get it now?
No.
That it wasn't the way they've been saying it was?
You mean we're going to learn from past mistakes? We're going to learn? America's going to learn from what happened, what went wrong before? What? Huh? Where? How? Show me evidence.
Evidence or no evidence, true believers like conservative pundit Ann Coulter still claim what the White House always has, that the war is being won.
Do you truly believe that Iraq is a better place today than it was?
No, I'm constantly saying things I don't believe. Yes, of course it is.
When we spoke with her 2 years ago, Coulter saw even the carnage on the streets of Baghdad as a sign of democratic progress.
Would not the argument be that there were other means to move that cause along without destroying half the country?
No.
So,
no, as we know.
So to free the
now,
Iraqis, destroying a good portion of their country and killing tens of thousands of them was just part of the deal. We were ultimately doing
No,
them
you're
a favor.
right. Sanctions were going gangbusters. They were working just fine.
Apparently, they got rid of those weapons of mass destruction, didn't they?
Do you get newspapers in Canada? Yes, there were weapons of mass destruction. There were not stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. We found them. He's used weapons of mass destruction. He used them against his own people. He used them against his neighbors.
To this day, Coulter still insists, as she did to us, that the outcome in Iraq will be worth it.
The Middle East is going to be a completely different place in 5 years, 6 years, well, soon it already is, and then we're not going to have to worry about Arabs flying planes into our skyscrapers any more than we worry about kamikaze pilots now. And Canada can stick its head in the sand, but it doesn't matter. We're making the world a better place.
But some of the neoconservatives who lobbied so hard to attack Iraq have changed their tune, criticizing the incompetence with which the war was planned and carried out, though almost all still stand by their cause, spreading American values throughout the world, as former CIA Director James Woolsey did when we spoke after the invasion.
Can you understand how people in the rest of the world, or some of the rest of the world, listen now to the rationalizations of the war in Iraq, and given what was said before and what's happened there since, look on it as justification of what is still a bad idea?
Sure, a lot of people are predisposed to think bringing democracy and the rule of law to the Middle East is a bad idea because they don't want to have to make a contribution to it, and because I think they want to put their head in the sand and believe that everything will work out fine.
Or might think that preemptive war without consensus internationally is a bad thing?
It's a traditional view. I think the president's made a good case that in a world of people like Saddam, Khamenei in Iran, Kim Jong-il in North Korea, that waiting for the associations with terrorists and the chemical, bacteriological, nuclear weapons programs to mature is an unsound view.
Since our conversation, James Woolsey has conceded that defeat in Iraq is now a real possibility, that the consequences could be awful, and that if there's any hope left, as he told us, it may only be after a very long haul.
I think we will be engaged in the war in Iraq for years and engaged in trying to bring changes to the Middle East for decades. As I said, this will be like the Cold War. It'll last for decades.
Indeed, after just 4 years, with more than 3,000 Americans killed and unimaginable civilian death and destruction, the war in Iraq has now lasted longer than the U.S. involvement in World War II, with no end in sight, and little, if any, admission the White House ever got any of it wrong.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended.
But remember this? Just 6 weeks after the invasion in 2003, George W. Bush gave a victory speech on an aircraft carrier in front of a banner that said, "Mission accomplished."
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. The United States and our allies have prevailed.
Well, you can still find that speech on the presidential website. But a black band across the bottom of the frame has conveniently pushed the "Mission Accomplished" banner out of sight at the top, a rare hint of any misstep in the White House version of the war.
The real question I always ask is, how did 8 or 9 neoconservatives who are basically utopians get control of the American government? How did they overwhelm the Congress, the press, the bureaucracy, all of us? How did they simply just run us into the ground? Is our democracy that fragile?
According to Seymour Hersh, the lingering question is this: was George W. Bush lying to us about the war in Iraq, or was he lying to himself?
I'm telling you, we would be better off if the president and the vice president and Rumsfeld really all got together and said, "Wow, we put one over on everybody. We got rid of Saddam and this is great." No, they believed it. And that's what's really frightening.
If you want to know more about this or any of our stories, you can go to our website. It's easy to find at cbc.ca/fifth. And we appreciate hearing from you. Let us know your thoughts about this program or ideas you might have for stories. Just go to the website and click on the link that says Contact Us. It's over on the right margin. Or you can mail us at the 5th Estate, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. And we do read everything that you send.